Genesis chapter 22 is probably one of the most controversial passages in the entire Bible. This is when Abraham is told to take his one and only son Isaac up onto the mountain and is told to sacrifice him there for God. And people have looked at this passage for centuries and thought, this is absolute insanity. Why would a loving God ask Abraham to do this? But as an English teacher, let me read through this with you and let me explain why this is actually a beautiful symbol of God's love and his sacrifice for us. Starting off with verses 1 and 2, it says, "Sometime later God tested Abraham. He said to him, 'Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. Then God said, 'Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you.'" Now, if you look at the notes, if you have a study Bible, it says that Mount Moriah in the territory later called Judah would become the site of the temple, but it is also a different site. In the New Testament, Calvary was identified with this site. Now, why is that important? Jesus, later on, God's one and only Son, was put on a cross on Calvary and died for our sins. He was the sacrificial lamb. Jesus was the sacrificial son. Later on in the passage, it says, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, just as Jesus had the wood put on him for the cross where he had to carry it up the mountain. Isaac carried the wood for the burnt offering up the mountain. Isaac then says, "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Who is the sacrificial lamb? Jesus, okay? So this is starting to paint a picture. This is starting to foreshadow what would happen thousands of years in the future when Christ came and died for our sins. It then says, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." And throughout this passage, it constantly says, your son, your only son, whom you love, because God understands the sacrifice. He knows what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to sacrifice his one and only son, whom he loves, for our sins. And this is a reminder to all of us that God has had a plan of redemption from the very beginning. Abraham then looks up and he sees a ram in the thickets, and he takes that ram and he is able to sacrifice that. And just as God provided the ram as a substitute for his son Isaac, as a substitute sacrifice, on the same mountain, thousands of years later, God provides Christ as a substitute for us, as a substitute for a sacrifice for our sins, because we have fallen short. His son came and lived the perfect life. He never disobeyed God. He never sinned. He never broke a law. He never did anything wrong. And he sacrificed himself. He was our substitute sacrifice and took on the pain and the torment and the punishment that we were supposed to have on the same mountain where God gave the substitute sacrifice of the ram for Isaac. I just think that is beautiful. I think it's a beautiful symbol of God's love, a beautiful symbol that God was not going to make Abraham give up his one and only son, but he was willing to do that for us. So, yes, this is a controversial passage. Yes, it is insane to us to think that God would ever ask for Abraham to sacrifice his son, but we see that God was painting a picture of the sacrifice that was to come, his one and only son, that laid down his life for our sins on the cross. And I hope that that gives you a blessing and a sense of peace today, because God has had this in plan from the very beginning, a plan to sanctify us, to save us, to bring him into a relationship with him through Christ. And I think it's even more beautiful that he did this on the same mountain that Christ would end up giving his life for us. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. God bless.